Stephen, thank you for that very generous introduction. Welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for your support of the American Monetary Institute's work over these past 20 years. Stephen Zarlenga's work is changing the world. We often, for all the accolades that Stephen would want to bestow on me, I in turn have a few words to say about Stephen as someone, on my account, I've traveled the world. I've met world leaders. I've met people of note in science, in mathematics, in physics, in literature. We are, in the presence of Stephen Zarlenga, we are in the presence of true greatness. In the 16th century, Copernicus offered for the consideration of the world a model that said that the world didn't revolve around the earth, that everything revolved around the sun, that the earth revolved around the sun. That Copernican model actually shattered the view of that people had of the heavens. And the consequences of it started a chain reaction of thinking that literally got people to consider our place in the universe. It was a central part of Renaissance thinking. The change in the model that Copernicus offered. And we have others who, in history, who have changed our view of the way we look at the world and have faced condemnation for it. Galileo, for example. You look at the life of Nikola Tesla, who, there's a car named after him now, but most people don't realize that Tesla brought forth dozens and dozens of ideas that were ignored at the time, but now today are starting to get popularized, and suddenly they're transformative. Stephen Zarlenga's decades of work on monetary policy is in the same vein of the historic figures that I mentioned. Because it really, when he did that work, laboring for decades on the lost science of money, he was really carrying the burden for humanity. This wasn't just about his work. He was laboring in solitary, carrying the burden that humanity carries for centuries, believing that we live in a world of limitation instead of having the capacity to create the world anew every day. Stephen's work has helped us to discover the immanent power of creativity which exists in money. In a way, he has helped to do something that no other person I've ever known or heard of has been able to do, and that is to take, if healthcare for all is a spiritual principle, if education for all is a spiritual principle, if peace is a spiritual principle, if having a job is a spiritual principle, Stephen has shown us a way to bring that spiritual principles into the material world and cause it to grow everywhere. One of the most famous paintings that Salvador Dali did, The Sower, is a picture of a man who is putting seeds out in a field. And we're told, as you sow, so shall you reap. Stephen has spent decades sowing these ideas about monetary policy. And he's trying to tell us there's a new world out there. It's right in front of us. It's hidden in plain sight. We have but to open our eyes and see it. Scientists who study quantum mechanics talk about what's described as the reality enfolded inside what is present. It's a reality that's hidden in what they call interstitial space. It's there, but you can't see it. The reality of Stephen's work in monetary policy is starting to break through to public awareness. It's starting to break out of that hidden space. We're evoking it with our work. I can't tell you I knew anything about monetary policy until the day that Stephen Zarlenga walked through the door of my office on May the 2nd, 4th, 2005. Because walking through that door with him was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Harper. I got that right, too. And to be sure that approximately 8-minute meeting was about only monetary policy and being an appropriate member of the House of Representatives, I kept it on monetary policy, although Elizabeth and I did exchange contact information. But once I got into that issue and really understood what he was talking about, and every one of you knows this experience, it changes the way you look at the world. You can't look at the world the same way. Whatever line of work any of us have ever been in, we all figure that, there's a point at which you get on in life and you figure you got it all, you know what's going on, you got to figure it out. And then somebody brings something to your attention, and your life changes. I like to think, and this is something I think about the day that Stephen and Elizabeth walked through the door of my office, I always remember this, and maybe some of you have had the experience. How somebody walks through a door, your home, your office, workplace, and you meet somebody and your life changes. Just changes. You think of people who have changed your life. Go back to the moment when you met them. They just suddenly appear and boom, everything changes. When Stephen and Elizabeth walked through that door on May the 4th, 2005, my life changed because, first of all, as a member of Congress, dealing with these issues of national priorities, of the national budget, national debt, I was, like every other member of Congress, trapped in a box of thinking about limitation, about how we just don't have enough. We can't meet the needs. But once I met Stephen and learned about his work in the lost science of money, I stepped out of the box and started to look at the world anew. That was a moment in my life. And so began 5 years of work on a bill, which resulted ultimately in a NEED Act. And let me tell you, it took 5 years because the shift in thinking just inside my office that it took to get people to understand what we were talking about. It's like we're talking a foreign language, trying to communicate what this means. No, you can't. Money, that's not money. You can't do that. That's money. How do you make money? Where's money come from? When you get people starting to think about where money comes from, it's like talking to them about where air comes from, or God or something. It's ubiquitous and nothingness at the same time. And so that moment when I understood that it was my responsibility now to take this into a broader public forum was the moment I gathered staff together. We started to talk about it. I had a really good staff member who, after a few years working on this, just said, I have to leave. I can't do this anymore. Because it's so mind-boggling, because what we had to do was to find a way to take these ideas and express them in a structure that would somehow work within the U.S. government. And we couldn't have done that unless unless our legislative council and the legislative help that Congress gets was available in the form of one Jim Wirt. Jim, I have to tell you, the country owes you a debt of gratitude for, no, really. We heard about, we're all familiar with the myth of the patience of Job, okay? Well, there's the patience of Jim Wirt working on this bill for years. And because, as Jim understood and explained to me, look, you move one thing here, another thing moves here, and in order to try to make this work, you've got to, this affects a good part of the government itself. But Jim knew, as I did, that we were working with and for a visionary. Really, Stephen. As much as I've said about you to try to give you credit, you're in a class by yourself in terms of someone who has this incredible ability to be able to transform social and political and economic structures. And there was also one other factor, and that was Elizabeth, as she, in hundreds of conversations we've had, in helping me to refine my understanding of the concepts that we were working with so that we could finally produce it in a bill that I could go around to members of Congress and explain. And of course, it's one thing in a marriage to have your partner ask you, well, is it done yet? 2006, is it done yet? 2007, done yet? 8, done yet? You want to talk about pressure. So we have to give Elizabeth credit for helping to move this along. And I know I'm not exaggerating when I say she still knows more about the bill than I do. And then I have to thank one of our staffers at the time who paid meticulous attention to the details of the bill and stayed with it daily and in a commitment of love and labor. And Jamie Walton, I can tell you that your participation in our office was absolutely central to be able to bring the bill along and get it to other offices and start to explain it and bring it out to the wider public. And and you're still doing it. You are a champ in every way on this monetary reform issue, and members of Congress seldom are able to function well without top staffers, and I was able to carry this bill forward with even greater strength because of you. So thank you. Jamie Walton, thank you, really. Everybody knows that. Thank you, Jamie. So that's the inside story about how this NEED Act came forward. I look today at a presidential election that is more like professional mud wrestling than it is about a serious discussion about the needs of our country. I consider the fact that the major economic issues of our time are really getting short shrift, and we are not we're still in a discussion of limitations. Tax cuts or tax increases. That's the only thing that Washington knows. Cut people's taxes, cut for some, which is part of the acceleration of the wealth upwards, or increase taxes, and that's part of the acceleration of the wealth upwards because the people at the top aren't paying a fair share. And so we're locked into a debate that is that same box that, I was circling inside of many years ago. And this really, America's at the threshold of a moment when we have to move the country in a direction of a profoundly different discussion about the nature of nationhood and the power of the government, the people's government, to reset the public agenda using the resources that, when our Constitution was first written, the founders put the mechanism in there. Under Article 1, Section 8, Congress had the power to coin or create money, period. We all know about the Federal Reserve Act. We all know how the public has not really understood that the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express, but that we have a condition that today the money system is run for the few at the expense of the many. Now, we all know that in this room. I have no need to preach to a choir. But the Reverend who was here earlier understood the social power of this message. We can organize people around this now. We can organize people along the thinking of creating plenty, of creating jobs for the many, of rebuilding America, of health care for all, and education for all, and jobs for all. There shouldn't be people sleeping in the streets of America. There shouldn't be people out on the street losing their homes. There shouldn't be people observing their jobs closing left and right all over America. We are really in a country right now that has the key to the deliverance of our democracy. And it goes back to the work of you, Stephen. And so it's up to us who are still involved in making public policy, either from the inside or the outside, to be as apostles spreading this word, because sooner or later it is going to catch on, because necessity being the mother of invention, we cannot keep going into this spiral of decline where we're told that we have to keep cutting public resources and assets, keep privatizing everything that belongs to the public, and chopping it up and cartelizing it and sending it off to in multinational corporations. We can't go that route. And so when people are waiting for alternatives, we can say we have the alternative. Jim, if you can sit almost on the back of an envelope and say, I'll figure out a way to write off $1 trillion in student debt, I mean, that tells you this is not imaginary. The mechanisms are there. Paradoxically, the Federal Reserve gave us a lesson with the quantitative easing that was used during the subprime meltdown, creating money out of nothing and giving it to who? Other banks. Not only in America, but internationally. Now, when you can explain to people they did that, it's one of those guess what moments. We can do the same thing. And we don't have to give the money to banks. We can put the money into circulation and spend it specifically for the needs of the people. When you start to communicate that to people, there's real power in that. And we need to take it into the black churches. We need to take it into labor halls. We need to take it across this country. This is the time to do it. We're at the threshold of a really powerful shift in public consciousness. It will not play out in the election of 2016. It's like a wave that's coming. And it'll wash over the 2016, and regardless of who gets elected in 16, there'll be a one-termer, because the changes that are coming are so powerful that there's this great opening that's occurred And it's an opening and awareness and tidal changes in politics, and an awareness and opening in public consciousness about the need for dramatic change. So we don't have to have poverty anymore. We don't have to have war anymore. We don't have to have sickness anymore. That this idea of a new Jerusalem or a heaven on earth isn't some phantasm. That we actually have the ability to create a new world. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote, "Come, my friends, it's not too late to seek a newer world." We aren't talking about a new world beyond the grave. We're talking about a new world here and now. And we create it with our intellect. We create it with our hands. We create it with our heart. We create it with a knowledge of history. We create it with the work of people like Stephen Zarlenga. We create it with the intention of the American Monetary Institute to provide the information to policymakers so that we can go forward and show how you do it. Here's how you get the money to rebuild the infrastructure. Here's how you get the money to put millions of people to work. Here's how you get the money to provide for housing for people. Here's where the money comes from so you can fund the medical needs of the country. Here's how you can assure people will have retirement security. Here's how you can make sure that every young person who wants to go to college can do so tuition-free. Here's the mechanisms. We don't have to live in poverty anymore. We don't have to live with war anymore. We can create that new world, and that's what this moment is about. 20 great years. Thank you, Stephen Zarlenga. Thank you, Lucien, for your work in supporting this effort. Let's hear it for Stephen Zarlenga and the American Monetary Institute.